Russia, a nuclear superpower spanning over 17 million square kilometers, or more than 1/8 of the Earth's inhabited land area, making it the largest nation in the world, and the motherland to perhaps the most manipulative bullies in the world. Though the USSR and the Russian Federation's ability to heavily influence satellite nations and its own nation can be attributed to the military and economic strength of Russia, it cannot be attributed to these factors alone. More important than the magnitude of the nation is the magnitude or influence of the head of state, or the marshal of the USSR. These leaders have been revered as nothing less than deities due to the efficient and effective use of propaganda. One of these dictators, Joseph Stalin, ruled Russia with an iron fist. A rather commonplace aspect of life in totalitarian USSR was irrationality, unpredictability, and sporadic and random arrests, beatings, executions, and exile. All of these characteristics of Soviet life made the Russian people feel pervasive terror. The very definition of the Stalinist state revolved around state-sponsored violence. Those praised one day can be imprisoned in the dreaded Lubyanka KGB headquarters. Several brilliant Bolsheviks whom Lenin had once praised were now branded enemies of the people, and then summarily executed. Boris Efimov, one of Stalin's propagandists throughout this period of terror, survived not by questioning, but by following orders.
My job as political cartoonist was also to expose or make fun of any enemy that the occasion demanded.
Stalin encouraged unconditional respect for his self-portrait as a wise leader and sole interpreter of scientific socialism. This was achieved through the liberal use of propaganda throughout Stalin's cruel reign. Stalin's exponential use of this propaganda would prove instrumental in the consolidation of his control. Soviet administrator and contemporary historian Rusty Komradovich explains some of the use of propaganda in Stalin's regime.
The persona that Stalin adopted through his propaganda, more often than not, oddly enough, revolved around children, as well as his predecessor and socialist purist, Lenin. Stalin ordered himself depicted by writers, artists, and other propagandists in this manner, so that even in the midst of the state-sponsored terror, perhaps even prisoners themselves might take comfort in the fact that Stalin was an altruist and lover of the Soviet people. They were to believe this because then they would not know that Stalin did not know about their arrest, the gulags, and the actions and executions by the KNVD. Otherwise, he would react accordingly.
However, the true Stalin was not known to the majority of the Soviet people. Historians consistently had to rewrite history books in order to edit out people who were no longer people, those that were made unmentionable after being purged. This past had to be written frequently. Stalinist propaganda also forced photographers to master retouching and editing skills. The manipulation of pictures became as important to photojournalists as the actual picture taking itself. Journalists quickly learned to airbrush or simply use scissors to a series of negatives in order to erase all visual memories of Stalinism's victims. This was a common aspect of Stalinist life in a land where intellectuals bitterly noted, "You cannot predict the past." Newspapers were written to portray Stalin as a great and all-caring leader, by publishing letters from peasant farmers and industrial workers, who all wrote letters to the editor about how Stalin had changed their lives for the better. Even the church was not beyond the reach of Stalin, who portrayed himself as a father figure, mingling religion with a cult of personality to deviate the attention of the people away from the church and towards Stalinism and the cult of Stalin. Stalin relied heavily on visual propaganda to immortalize his leadership. The number of portraits, posters, pictures, and statuses used to represent Stalin during his reign were almost uncountable. His image appeared everywhere, in every context, and always greater than life. Stalin's contemporary, Vladimir Putin, has distinguished himself from leaders of the Russian state of the past 25 years in various significant ways. The first strong national leader to emerge out of the chaos of the post-Soviet period, he has received expressions of mass adoration from the Russian citizens, the likes of which Russia had not seen since the Stalin era. Soon after his victory and the presidential elections of March 2000, portraits of Putin appeared for sale in Russian bookstores and were displayed everywhere in Russia. Putin's popularity among Russian women has been rising due to his created image, including the attributes of sobriety, intelligence, competence, physical and psychological health, and most importantly, his manliness and sexual appeal. Alexandra Belov, a working secretary in Moscow, explains her devotion and approval for the president.
Yes, I think Putin is most amazing man in Russia. He is very brave and very smart, and he will lead our country to victory. He would never hurt anyone, especially women. And he is the most amazing man ever. I wish my husband was more like Putin.
Putin experienced high approval ratings from the Russian population from the beginning of his first campaign. Although recent polls show a slight decline in Putin's popularity in the wake of a global economic crisis, he still outpolls other Russian political figures, including Medvedev, the current prime minister and previous president of Russia. The government of the Russian Federation, often called the Kremlin after the fortified residence of the president located in the heart of Moscow, is a very powerful and controlling authority. During the past decade, the Kremlin has systematically expanded its control of the country's mass media, and especially of television, to propagate a public image of Vladimir Putin as a strong, successful leader. As New York Times' Clifford Levy reported, Putin's political opponents vanished from the media as the campaign for the 2008 elections gained momentum.
Senior government officials denied the existence of a stop list, saying that people hostile to the Kremlin do not appear on TV simply because their views are not newsworthy. In interviews, journalists said that they did not believe that the Kremlin kept an official master stop list, but that the networks kept their own, and that they all operated under an informal stop list, an understanding of the Kremlin's likes and dislikes.
Such involved measures have led many commentators to label the current Russian government as either wholly authoritarian or as a hybrid regime, which allows oppositional parties and movements to exist but also limits their ability to alter the status quo through a variety of repressive measures. When Putin came into power in 1999, journalists had begun talking about his cult of personality. This phrase draws a comparison between the Soviet era and contemporary Russia, suggesting that Putin's popularity and propaganda serves ends similar to those of the Soviet leaders, particularly of Stalin. Dr. Vlad Golov, a Russian historian specializing in propaganda in Soviet and contemporary Russia, explains.
When you actually look at the Putin cult that we have today, it parallels in a very interesting way the cult of personality that was during the Stalinist times, under Stalin as well as under Lenin, already established as the kind of normal rule of how the Communist Party tried to get all the people surrounding the government, despite some of the government actions potentially being unpopular. And so we see Putin doing the very same thing that we have seen in Soviet times.
It is clear that over the past 20 years, the power of the Russian state has not waned. Even after the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia has maintained its historic role as the authoritative head of Eastern Europe. The totalitarian power maintained by the heads of the state in Russia still easily allows for the enforcement of its policy in the East due to the amount of propaganda and political consternation that Russian society as a whole is exposed to. This occurs to the extent that the figureheads of the USSR, as well as the Russian Federation, particularly Stalin and Putin, have been especially worshipped due to the efficient and effective use of propaganda. Though the type of propaganda and the manner in which it is used differs between the two leaders, there is no denying the power that the two held and is still maintained today, creating a totalitarian system in which the head of the state is also the unquestionable leader of a system, a nuclear power, the head of the East, or Bear Country.